Hello, and welcome to Denton's Tales of the Viking Age. And this time, I'll be discussing the rather considerable connection of the Vikings with what we might call the mythology of Christmas. That is, the traditions and the customs. There are numerous contributions to those aspects of it, in fact. Yes, Christmas. What, I hear you ask, could the Vikings, or more correctly, the Norse people, have to do with Christmas? And not those who'd converted to Christianity. Oh no, the pagan Norse. They who worshipped the gods of Asgard, or Asgard as it is in English. Odin and Thor, Throya, Tyr and Hel. Well, quite a lot actually. Though none of it had anything whatsoever to do with Christmas as such, in its representation of the birth of Jesus Christ, since that event and the festival that would come to honour it was still centuries in the future when the pagan traditions were formed, when the gods of Asgard reigned supreme in the northern lands. I'm sure many people will be very surprised to learn that most of the Christmas traditions are not in fact Christian in origin, and in their original form have absolutely nothing whatever to do with the birth of Jesus, despite their association now with that most Christian of festivals, and that they are actually Scandinavian and Germanic pagan ones, stemming mainly from the Norse Yule. Similar customs can be found in Celtic and Slavic paganism, but in the specific context of traditions at Christmas, it is from the Nordic beliefs that most of ours derive. Yule was the midwinter festival that began on the winter solstice, December the 21st, and lasted until January the 12th, celebrated with feasting, banquets, games, a great deal of drinking, and general merrymaking, and culminating with the Yule bloat, or Yule sacrifice, towards the end. Though most of the festivities occurred over the first 3 days after the solstice, those days were the official celebratory period, if you like. The sacrifice didn't have to involve killing anything. It could be simply offerings of food or mead, though animals would be killed as a rule and offered to the gods. And sometimes, of course, people, such as war captives, for example, were used. I mean, why not? It made sense, I suppose. It saved having to feed them, and if it made the gods happy, then everyone was happy. Well, no, not everyone, I suppose. I mean, the captives weren't too overjoyed about it. You see, they didn't see the great honour that was being extended to them by being offered to the gods. Some people just don't appreciate what you try to do for them. There's gratitude for you. Anyway, the names Yule and Yuletide to describe the festive season derive, of course, from the Norse word Yule, and it was often called Christmastide in later centuries, though the word Yuletide is first recorded only as late as 1475. Christmas itself is known today as Yule in Iceland and the Faroe Islands, and as Yule in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. But before we get into the actual celebratory connections with the Norse Yule, I think a look at the coming of Christianity to Scandinavia and the Norse settlements abroad is in order to set the scene, if you like, because it is an integral part of the process of the transformation of pagan ideas to Christian ones. For hundreds of years, the Norse people had worshipped the gods of Asgard, bringing their faith with them as they settled abroad, spreading out across much of Europe and beyond, founding settlements in Ireland, many parts of England, Scotland, Wales, the Orkney, Shetland and Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland and Francia, among other places. But Christianity began to creep into Scandinavia and the Norse settlements abroad during the 9th century. The first conversion attempts occurring around 830 AD in Sweden, prompted by King Bjorn, though it wasn't until the start of the 12th century that Sweden became officially Christian. In the mid-900s, King Håkon the Good attempted to bring Christianity to Norway, rather unsuccessfully as it turned out, but one of his decrees was that the Norse Yule and the Christian Christmas should be celebrated together, integrating their respective practices to some extent. And he further ordered that each person must drink a specified quantity of ale or mead, and continue to celebrate until every drop of it was gone. As long as there was a drop left, you kept on celebrating by royal decree. Given that, as far as we can work it out, the drink to be consumed amounted to 4 gallons, it seems rather doubtful that many people would have been very steady on their feet by the end of the festivities. It's a good Yule. Look, you see? Look. Not even one drop left over. Long live King Håkon. Well, anyhow. Yes. That was the only legislation in history, as far as I'm aware, that punished someone for not getting drunk. I'm sure King Haakon must have been very popular with pagans and Christians alike. In some places, the Norse began converting to Christianity without any great pressure put on them to do so, most notably perhaps here in Ireland, where intermarriage and the resulting assimilation between Danes and Norwegians and the native Irish became more frequent as time went on, until eventually there was little difference between the Irish and the foreigners as far as identity and religion went. For example, the great Hiberno-Norse king of Dublin, Sigurd Olafsson, known as Silkbeard, who ruled on and off from 995 to 1036 AD, was the son of a Norse nobleman and an Irish princess. Such a union was quite the norm by that time. And he himself was a Christian who not only went on a pilgrimage to Rome, but also founded Dublin's Christ Church Cathedral. Around 995, another Norwegian king, Olaf Tryggvason, became a more aggressive converter to Christianity, with far greater success than had King Haakon, probably due to his sheer determination and considerable brutality, destroying any pagan temples he could get his hands on, and saving the souls of his people by torturing or killing anyone who refused to become Christians, or at least nominally so, whatever they might actually believe in private. And he put the same effort into spreading the new faith into the Norse settlements abroad. In Denmark, around 975 AD, King Harald Gormson, or Harald Bluetooth, as he's usually called, began his own similar attempts to bring Christianity to his country. So by the 11th century, the old pagan beliefs were dying out across Scandinavia and the various Norse territories abroad, gradually replaced by the new faith. But how really successful was it? As the saying goes, people convinced against their will remain of the same opinion still, at least in private, whatever they might tell others, especially others who might whack their heads off for saying it. Significantly, perhaps, religious fervour in Scandinavia never rose to the extent that it did in other parts of Europe during the Middle Ages, such as Spain, Italy, or France, where it often resulted in severe social repression and warfare stemming from somewhat overzealous religious beliefs. And it's interesting to note also that the Scandinavian countries are among the least religious in the world today. And while many people there, when asked about it, do admit to having a faith in something, it frequently isn't the God of the Bible. And of course, in 2016, a beautiful pagan hof or temple dedicated to Odin and the gods of Asgarda, the first of its kind in over 1,000 years, was constructed in the village of Corinth in Denmark. The building made entirely of wood, its stepped roofs decorated with dragon heads, and 4 massive tree trunks supporting it inside. And those tree trunks are ash trees, the same as the great tree of life, Yggdrasil, that features so strongly in Norse mythology, where sit the 3 Norns weaving the fate of humanity. Roosters were sacrificed and eaten, their blood used in the dedication ceremony, being sprinkled around the walls, as would have been done centuries ago. And very strangely, when people re-entered the Hof after the dedication ceremony outside, there were 3 peals of thunder. A coincidence or a message from Thor? Like Scandinavia, Iceland too has never shown any great outpourings of religious fervour over the centuries, since its conversion around the year 1100 AD. And some local customs in that country still strongly reflect pagan traditions. Painted stones outside houses, for example, there to honour the Landvatir, the protective spirits of the land. And other similar stones in fields that are never mowed closely, nor are children ever allowed to play on them for the same reason. The Landvatir are still taken seriously in Iceland, even sometimes if only subconsciously, in a way that, well, say the leprechauns of Ireland are not. No Irish person would seriously do something to honour the little people, other than perhaps for the benefit of American tourists who love that sort of thing. Yet, when a United States Air Force base was being built in Iceland during the Cold War, and that's not very long ago, construction was actually halted for a couple of weeks to give the Landvatir time to leave a sacred stone before it was moved. The workmen wouldn't touch it until they were sure the spirits had left. And of course, Iceland has also now constructed a pagan temple, the land for it actually donated by the city of Reykjavik. And other municipalities in Iceland are considering doing the same. I think that's rather nice. There is, by the way, also a pagan temple in that very Catholic country, Poland, though it is dedicated to the old Slavic gods. So, having got all that out of the way, at rather considerable length, what Christmas traditions do we owe to the Norse celebration of Yule? To start with, the Christmas wreath. Green things, and especially green things with red berries on them, are a part of many pagan cultures. They were used by the Celtic Druids in Britain and Ireland, for example. And of course, they are so common on doors or in windows today at Christmas time, as well as other forms of greenery associated with Christmas. Our use of them, particularly at that specific time, coming down to us principally from Norse tradition. Plants like holly, mistletoe, ivy, and various evergreens remained green during the winter, which, come to think of it, I suppose is why we call them evergreens. And they were seen as possessing a spirit magic against the dark forces of winter, since belief in various spirits was very strong in those times and still retains its hold in Iceland, as I've said. No Viking warship, for example, would have approached a friendly harbour without removing the dragon or sea serpent heads from the prow and stern posts for fear of frightening or offending the Landvertier. And of course, cargo ships didn't have those things to begin with, the ferocious heads being the trappings of warships. Wreaths, garlands, or bushels of these spirit-endowed green plants will be hung up over doorways and windows to ward off evil things and negative thoughts. And they'd be strung around the walls as well, providing both protection to the home and decorations at the same time. The strong, fresh scent of evergreens would freshen the otherwise rather stagnant and smoky house. And pine cones and needles were burnt to fill the home with their protective fragrance, acting as a sort of incense. Since most houses didn't have chimneys in those days, they had a long firebox or a hearth in the middle of the room, and seldom any windows to speak of. The smoke spread up and around the building and went out through a hole in the roof, or didn't, depending on the direction of the wind at the time. The tradition of the holly and the ivy also comes from those times, one being seen as a male plant, the other as female, and both share a similar dark green colour, so the two were placed together, an attractive decoration that of course also possessed a sexual symbolism. As Christianity replaced the old gods, the symbolism of the holly changed. It became known in Scandinavia as Christ's thorn. Some early Christians actually didn't like its associations and tried to ban the use of all plants altogether as decorations, regarding them as evil pagan symbolism with the connections to the various spirits of nature. But the advantages of keeping such traditions and adapting them to make Christianity more palatable to pagans won out. So the various pagan traditions simply changed sides, you might say. Pagan and thus very bad. Rather cynically became Christian, and thus very good, despite being exactly the same as they were previously. Mistletoe, another symbol of Christmas, with a highly romantic connotation, has a very special place in Norse mythology, since it was inadvertently responsible for the death of the beautiful god Balder, the son of Odin and Frigg, when the trickster Loki got the blind god Hodor to throw a dart made from mistletoe at him, and it penetrated his heart. All the gods had loved Balder, so much so that they had wished to keep him safe from harm. So Frigg called on everything in the 9 realms, demanding a binding oath never to harm her son. Water and fire, earth and rocks, trees, iron and all other metals, all the animals, birds and creatures that crawled, and all the poisons and sicknesses, all swore the oath never to harm him. Everything save one. She overlooked the mistletoe. Loki found out about it, and, being Loki, used it to cause trouble. Frigg's tears after the death of her son became the white pearl-like berries on the plant, but it was forgiven, and she decreed that mistletoe would never again be used as a weapon, and that she would send a kiss to all those passing beneath it, a gift in the memory of the beautiful Balder. So it came to be seen as a symbol of love and friendship, a tribute, if you like, to the beauty of Balder, and to be regarded as something to stand under while kissing someone. There is another version of the story in which Balder returns to life, with Frigg offering the kiss under the mistletoe in gratitude. But the correct version, if you like, is that he was never able to return, despite Frigg's efforts to get the goddess Hel to return him from her realm of the dead. Hel, who probably liked Balder as everyone else did, and was told that all creation wept for him, agreed that if indeed all things would shed a tear for him, she would release him and return him to the gods. Messengers travelled the 9 worlds. Everyone and everything wept for Balder, all save one, a female Jotun or giant, who refused to weep, saying, "Let Hel keep what she has." The Jotun was actually the shape-shifting Loki. Of course it was. And so Hel's condition was not met, and Balder remained in the realm of the dead. Though this symbolism comes from Scandinavia, the plant's name actually derives from Old English, the Anglo-Saxons calling it mistletoe, from mistel, which meant dung, and tan, meaning a stick or a twig. The plant is actually a parasite, you see, spread by bird droppings landing on other plants that it can grow on, hence the name. Should you be thinking of grabbing someone you like and planting a smacker on them under a sprig of mistletoe, I do hope the romantic setting won't be spoiled by knowing that you are standing under something the name of which literally means shit on a stick. The Yule log. Now that also derives from Norse and North Germanic pagan tradition, when a small tree would be cut down, the entire tree being brought into the house and one end of it put into the fire, so that it was large enough to gradually burn down over the midwinter festivities, being pushed into the firebox a bit at a time as it burned. And any remaining pieces of it would be kept to help light next year's log. In the meantime, the partly burned wood would be kept in the home to ward off all manner of things, including lightning, toothache, flies, and chilblains. The tree, of course, possessing its own spirits, and its unburned pieces bringing their continued protection to the home. The Christmas tree, standing there with all those little decorations hanging on it. Now, surely that's a modern Christian idea? Well, the first Christmas trees were introduced into England quite recently, that's true enough, from Germany by Prince Albert, husband of Queen Victoria. But originally it too was a pagan tradition of the winter solstice, both as a living tree outside the home, which would be decorated with candles and apples, stars and other symbols, as well as food for the spirits, or when an evergreen tree would be brought into the home called a Yule tree, so that the tree spirits would come in along with it and inhabit the dwelling and bestow blessings on the occupants. And these trees would be decorated with things like apples and stars and little treats like cakes for the spirits to enjoy. As with the holly, the tree decorations continued, but significantly changed their meaning for the Christians. For example, apples that would once have been seen as the youth-giving apples of the Norse goddess Odin, keeper of the magic apples of youth and the giver of eternal youthfulness to the gods, became the fruit of the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, and stars became symbols of God and heaven, while the trees themselves, given their generally triangular shape, became symbols of the Holy Trinity. That was an excellent example of the very clever use of pagan symbols and traditions by the early church, just as they took pagan feast days and associated them with Christian ideas or saints, making it easier for pagans to accept them, as was done in Ireland with the Celtic goddess Bridget, who was renamed Saint Bridget, worshipped on the same feast day and bringing much of her pagan symbolism and ceremonies with her into Christianity. It was a brilliant use of psychology centuries before psychology was invented. The early church got there long before Sigmund Freud. The Christmas ham, too, is yet another reminder of pagan times, another legacy of the Norse peoples, when it would have been boar meat, the Yule boar representing homage to the god Freyr, who was said to ride on a gold-bristled boar named Gullinbrasti, or Golden Brisses, which had been made for him as a gift. Freyr's feast day was December the 26th, which is hardly a coincidence, since, as I've said, the early church frequently adopted pagan festivals and ideas to make it easier to convert people, adapting them to make it, well, more readily acceptable to new ideas that were similar to and occurred on the same dates as those people were used to. Those with a special devotion to Freya's sister, Freya, might have seen it as the Sow Hildesvini, or battle swine, since she too rode a boar at times when she wasn't being drawn in her chariot by two cats. Another tradition associated with the Yule boar, although it was discontinued with the advent of Christianity, was the swearing of oaths while laying hands on the boar's bristles, the animal then being sacrificed to the gods, which, of course, Christians didn't do, making the oath binding. All oaths, of course, were considered binding to the Norse, but a Yule oath was even more so, totally unbreakable, regardless of how impossible or stupid it might be, and being drunk was no excuse, despite the considerable quantity of drink consumed at that time, even before King Haakon's edict. We see a fine example of the Norse attitude to oaths, actually, in the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, who very foolishly took an oath to conquer England with only 2 ships. Despite the obvious impossibility of doing that, most longships would have a crew of perhaps 50 or 60 men, and knowing full well that to try would result in his own death, he had to do it. He had no choice. He'd taken an oath, and that oath must be kept, resulting, of course, in his being tossed into a pit of vipers by King Aelle of Northumbria. Sitting in a pit full of vipers is very bad for one's health, as Ragnar discovered. A pagan tradition of the midwinter festival, which is still popular in Scandinavia today, is the Yule goat, or Yule goat, as it would have been 1,000 years ago. A little straw figure of a goat tied up with red ribbons and used as a decoration in the home, on the tree, and so forth. And this is a Yule goat. This particular one was made in Sweden. The custom of making these little straw goats dates from the pagan tradition that the last sheaf from the newly harvested crop had a special magic associated with it, that it held the power of a good crop, and it would be preserved by making it into the figure of a goat. Since the god Thor rode across the sky in a chariot drawn by goats, and as the protector of Midgard, he would surely look with favour on such a symbol made in honour of his goats. And the figure would then be used in rites during the midwinter festival to ensure another good crop the following year, thus becoming the Yule goat. It is a living link in Scandinavia today with the pagan culture of 1,000 years ago. The religion may differ, the symbolism is different, it is relegated to the status of a decoration rather than a harbinger of a plentiful harvest, but the little goat lives on as a reminder of the past. Another association with the Norse midwinter festivities is, believe it or not, Santa Claus himself, and even his reindeer. Odin was closely associated with the midwinter festival, one name for him in fact being the Yule Father, and at that time he would ride out from Åsgard on his 8-legged horse Sleipnir and travel around, riding over the rooftops with his spear in his hand, visiting people in their homes and bestowing runes as gifts. His 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, flying ahead to see who was good and who was bad. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Centuries later, Dutch Christians took the idea, calling him Sinterklaas, who rode across the rooftops carrying a staff in his hand and bringing gifts, and even taking the concept of the 2 ravens who accompanied Odin, who were black obviously, and turning them into 2 black helpers, known as Svartapete, meaning black Pete, who would go out and gather information just as did Odin's ravens, listening at chimneys and returning to Sinterklaas to tell him which children had been good and which had not, as the ravens would have listened at the smoke holes in the roofs and informed Odin which people had been good. The 19th century idea of Santa drawn by 8 reindeer came, of course, from the image of the 8-legged Sleipnir. Some modern scholars dispute that link with Odin, but the similarity seems too obvious to ignore. It's almost identical, in fact. Both ride across the rooftops carrying something long and thin, a spear or a staff. Both are preceded by 2 black-coloured helpers who tell them who to give gifts to, and one rides a horse with 8 legs while the other is pulled by 8 reindeer. There are also calls from some people in Holland today for the Svartapete to be banned as racist, traditionally dressed as they are in Moorish costumes and depicted with black faces, though others see them as simply a harmless tradition. The Dutch version of Santa, seen at Christmas parties or on children's TV shows, often garbed much like a bishop rather than the red-suited image of Santa seen elsewhere, accompanied by the 2 black-faced helpers in turbans. However, unlike the Yule log, the Christmas tree, the wreath, reindeer, or the various decorations, the Christmas turkey can hold its head up in pride. Well, at least until somebody chops it off. And it can claim its place as fully and totally Christian, having nothing to do with Yule, since, well, there weren't any turkeys in Scandinavia. So, with that, I come to the end of this little look into the pagan contribution to the modern celebration of Christmas. So, until next time, I shall say farewell. Bye for now. Oh, and don't forget, God and Yule. Bye for now.